This is the Marriage Podcast, and I'm your host, Alexandra Stockwell. I'm a physician turned relationship and intimacy expert, and I specialize in showing couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships. I myself have been married for 25 years. My husband and I have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing relationship. If you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship, and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place because I will show you how. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, this is Alexandra. And on this episode of the Marriage Podcast, I'm going to share my philosophy of relationships. The very first thing that I want to say is that I believe relationship, marriage, committed long-term relationships for sure, although other relationships as well. Relationships are the vehicle for personal growth. In other words, you don't just find the right person and then have a great relationship. You find the person that you're going to grow with, and then you're going to have a great relationship. Because any way you cut it, when you're with someone, you've built a life together, you love one another, your lives are blended, that person is going to activate you and invite you and require growth of you. And if you resist that, relationships can be really hard. But if you embrace that your relationship is your vehicle for personal growth, one of them, your relationship will benefit and blossom in all kinds of incredible ways. Which brings me to my second point. I believe that having a fantastic relationship is a completely learnable skill. Mammals learn from imitation, and human beings are mammals. This means that the majority of our learning is through imitation of what we have experienced in others. Sure, you can learn all kinds of sophisticated things with your intellect. Your frontal cortex can be fully functioning and a source of all kinds of accomplishment. And the fact is that the majority of our learning still is through imitation. Most people did not grow up in a home where their parents or the adults around them had relationships which are ones you want to imitate. And even if, let's say, your grandparents really shared a wonderful love with one another, or your parents, which is such a beautiful thing, they still lived in another era where men's and women's roles were different, working women earning more or less money than their spouses. There are all kinds of things that were at play in earlier times that just don't pertain right now. Plus, you're going to be married to another person who has his or her history and set of experiences and wounding and considerations. So, really, you can learn from people around you, but no one has really provided a relationship that is entirely worthy of your emulation. So, what you need instead is education. The problem is that education is hard to come by. It's not taught in schools. As I said, it's not, at least in its entirety, taught in homes. Most churches don't offer anything that would be relevant in this conversation. Porn, like, where are you going to learn how to have emotional intimacy, a rich, nourishing, dynamic, stable, passionate marriage with erotic connection, emotional connection, intimacy in all kinds of ways? Well, one of the reasons that I have started this podcast, that I coach people, that I teach, that I offer the programs that I offer, because I want to serve you in providing the education that will allow you to have a relationship as fantastic as you desire. So make sure to keep listening to this podcast. Read my book. It's called Uncompromising Intimacy, because I am laying out the roadmap for you to create a really fantastic relationship. Another thing that I believe, which is really relevant, is that integrated sensuality is everyone's birthright. And in this moment, I really want to say it's every woman's birthright. Feeling like it is wonderful to inhabit the body you live in, to touch it and be touched, to take your pleasure from your sensual experiences. I believe that is a birthright. And if you've made it to adulthood and into a committed relationship with all of that available to you, I celebrate you. Bravo. And if you're like the vast majority of people who, along the road to adulthood, have become disconnected with a lot of your sensuality, with pleasure, with feeling like you deserve it, with feeling that you know what you want in order to have it, well, this podcast is going to have something for you because that too is a learnable skill if you're willing to be courageous enough and explore in ways that can feel kind of edgy and vulnerable, though everything that I teach and share can definitely be pursued at the pace you desire with the utmost gentleness and care for yourself and anyone else that you're interacting with. Another thing that I really believe that is part of my relationship philosophy is that when it comes to long-term relationships, everything which isn't sex is foreplay. This obviously is not true when it comes to a one night stand or early in dating. But if you're living with someone, you're sharing a life with someone, then any interaction throughout your day, it's either moving towards connection, building and nourishing connection, or it's not. It's either neutral or it's specifically disconnecting. And either way, that's moving you away from connection. So I want to say a little bit more about this. It's certainly provocative and fun to say that in a long term relationship, everything which isn't sex is foreplay. And I really do believe that. But let me tell you how I come to this understanding. When I first prioritized my pleasure and learned to really enjoy being a woman, I already had 3 children. I'd been married for a while. And I just had been focused on other things. You can listen to the episode about my backstory to know more about my context. But in any case, I would leave for the weekend and go to various workshops and trainings and various opportunities for women. And I would feel amazing. Like at first, it was just intimidating and kind of terrifying. But then I learned to open up, relax, feel safe, and access the glory of being a woman in my body and in my life. And then I'd drive home and I'd get to my driveway and my energy would just drop and I'd be back in the energetics of obligation, doing everything for everybody else, feeling like I came last. Eventually, I learned to bring this energy home to my bedroom and really spice up the sex and bring the passion when my husband and I were alone and everyone else in the house was asleep. But that still left a lot of hours in my day, which were not filled with pleasure and flirtation and feeling really good and important to myself. No, there were a lot of hours in my day where I was just doing, making sure everyone had what they need, tending my 4 children, cooking dinner, making sure the house was clean, working, just like doing, hoping that at the end of the day, then there'd be something left for me. Although usually I was just so tired, I'd fall asleep. And one day I was sauteing onions, thinking about how the kids were annoying to me and I needed to do this and there was all this stuff and I just was sauteing those onions in anger. So when I realized that I was going to be sauteing those onions no matter how I felt, I decided to feel good. And I started stirring the wooden spoon more slowly. Suddenly, I smelled the aroma of the onion. I breathed more slowly. I found myself just rotating my hips very gently, and I felt turned on and full of joy and a little sexy. And all I was doing was sauteing onions. And that was radical for me. It was a major breakthrough because in that moment, I saw that I could enjoy being a sensual, joyous woman pretty much in any situation. Well, maybe not any, but many, many more than I was. And with that, I threw out all of my shapeless aprons. I got this amazing functional French made style apron, and I made it my spiritual practice to enjoy myself in mundane everyday activities like changing diapers, cooking dinner, washing dishes, serving food, correcting my children's table manners. I still could be in touch with that wonderful woman I am that I had access to in these various retreats and trainings and women's circles, that I had access to in the bedroom with my husband. I now had access to my erotic nature in a super discreet way, but it made all the difference for me. And it's in this sense that everything in long term relationship, which isn't sex, is foreplay, in that I accessed a way to fuel connection with myself and with my husband so that then our sex and our physical passion was just a natural extension of how we were living our lives day to day, as opposed to being this other activity that we were able to sometimes do. So, this is a number of the pieces of my philosophy about relationships. I've shared it a bit like an audio collage. I'm really glad to share this piece of art and hope you'll continue listening. Share any questions. If you have a request for themes that I address, just go to my website, alexandrastockwell.com, and send me a message, and I'll be really happy to do a podcast episode on any topic or theme that you request. And please, please, please go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review, because many more people will have access to this information if you subscribe, rate, and review. I would be so grateful. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Marriage Podcast. Please rate and review the show on iTunes. It really makes a difference. And if you have a question or a comment, reach out to me via my website at alexandrastockwell.com.